So anyhow, here was the other day's Facebook thing for Lent. God always loves us, even with our mistakes and sins. So the next station we're going to look at is Simon. And this guy, this ordinary guy, called out of nowhere. I mean, he was no more expecting to be dragged out of the crowd to help Jesus carry the cross than anything else. But isn't that what we do? I've come to think of it that way over the years. You know, when the tough stuff comes. Somebody said to me once, and it sounds so pious, but it's true. They said, this is your way of helping to carry the cross. This is your Simon moment, you know. So that's what we want to look at here. So St. Joseph, an ordinary guy called out of nothing to do this important job. Here he is with Jesus' first steps. God's quite pleased with the little good that we do. We don't have to do the big dramatic stuff. Just be who you are and the little things. Francis used to say, if you can go into work, did I say this already? If you can go into work and be kind and patient to the person that drives you nuts the most, then you're on your way to sainthood. That's all that God requires, you know? It's patience and gentleness on a daily basis. And that's what inspired Therese to come up with the little way. You know, it's the little stuff. It's also the little stuff that drives you crazy. As Francis used to say on a trip, it's not the strenuousness of the journey, it's the little mosquitoes that get you on the way. You know, that's what really can make you crazy. So here's our first lay ministers in the church, St. Paul's friends, Priscilla and Aquila, who were later martyred, but they were also tent makers. That's what drew them together, and they would see each other at conventions where they set up tents for things, you know? And so they're the first evangelists, and in one of his letters, I always forget if it was who it was. Let's just say it was the Thessalonians, who knows? But he wrote ahead and said, please greet them, be nice to them, they're my friends, you know, basically. So here they are. Priscilla has her laptop in her lap. And Aquila has the book, he's ready to go, and that's us. We evangelize, we do the work of carrying the cross through whatever our work is, you know, and just enjoying it. You know, I am so sad to learn everywhere I go how many people don't love what they have to do when they get up in the morning. You know, you're for whatever your circumstances are in life, it's kind of like you don't have the luxury of travel or changing your job if you have a family, all that stuff, you know. So what you have to do is look for the ways that can keep things positive and to be grateful for the job, you know. So St. Stephen, patron of deacons, this is a new one. I just gave him that little speaker up top. But I like to tweak things a little bit. My mother used to say, where do you get your ideas? Not only always in the most flattering tone, I might add. But anyhow, it's traditional to show Stephen with the Bible and 3 stones on it because he was stoned to death. And of course, St. Paul witnessed that before his conversion. And he gathered everybody's cloaks and guarded them while they were stoning this guy. I forgot to tell you in that story of Mary and Deuteronomy and Joseph that the United Nations estimates that to this day there are 5,000 honor killings, they're called, a year in the world still. Parents murdering their own children. Mostly in the Middle East, in these remote, you know, strongly Islamic culture, and in Africa. And a couple years ago, you may recall, in Toronto it happened. A couple from Afghanistan found their 17-year-old daughter was looking at dating sites on her computer, and they killed her because she was bringing shame and disgrace onto the family. And that's what Mary did by getting pregnant. It was the whole thing was, you're ruining the family name. The most precious thing a man could give his son-in-law was his daughter's virginity. That's why it was considered that. You know, it was a possession, a prize, or whatever. And so they just got out of control. And so stoning to death, you remember a couple of years, not long ago, we saw on television, was it 10 years in Afghanistan, a woman caught in adultery was brought into an arena, soccer arena, and stoned to death, and they filmed it till she fell to the ground. So that's what's reminding me is the 3 stones with Stephen. That's exactly what happened to him. Therese, love the little, you know. Just look for God in the ordinary. So even when you're doing the dishes or things that you normally would hate to do, if you turn it into a moment of an opportunity for prayer, what a wonderful thing, and this drudge all of a sudden becomes, I got 10 minutes to myself, and I'm just going to turn it over to God, And your whole outlook changes, It's kind of like you look forward to fasting almost sometimes, or doing the things, the little things to set up. And it's also a way, as my mom used to say, great wisdom of the saints, offer it up, But guess who's doing it all the time now? It's such a way to connect with a friend or a loved one who might be going through something terrible, and you can't do anything for them, and that kills you. What you can do is share in some small way in the suffering moment with them. And when you do it out of love, rather than fear and obligation, it changes everything, and you almost look forward to it. And the bishops of Italy, a couple years ago, told everybody in Lent, let's not fixate on this no meat on Friday thing, They're knocking it, But they said real sacrifice and fasting isn't about not having meat. This is Italy. You're going to eat well no matter what, Go out and have, wonderful food no matter whether there's meat in it or not. It's not about the meat. And that's what you feel like telling these bishops sometimes. Get over that. The bishops of Italy told them, give up your internet for 3 hours on Friday. Do something where you're really going to feel the personal hurt, So I'm very traditional Catholic in that sense. I'm all for fasting on Fridays. I sometimes even think they shouldn't do it all year long like in the old days, not just Lent. But not the meat piece, Because what happens is it turns everybody into these scrupulous little, I ate a piece of a hamburger, I'm going to hell, and all that nonsense, That's not what it's about. And that's what the little way is all about, finding your little way. So Francis used to love, he just told people, as we all know, when he was Archbishop, he loved to ride the bus and the subway, He loved to, I keep forgetting I'm supposed to stick by your side here. He loved to just be out there and mingle with the people. And in one of his letters, I've been doing a lot of research on Francis. This is a good place to plug. My next book's called Dear Young People. And it's his tweets and messages to young people, And anyhow, he says, everybody should have a gospel. He said, you don't need all 4 of them. Pick your favorite gospel. And he said, put it in your purse or your pocket. And he said, when you're sitting on a subway, if it's not too crowded, he said, if it's too crowded, don't do that because you want to hold on to the pole. But he said, if you can, just take it out and, spend that subway time praying, Find the little ways to keep the gospel alive. So that's what he's doing here. In a family, it's normal to take charge of those in need of help. Don't be afraid of frailty. He wrote this a couple months ago. It's one of his tweets. And so that's what it's all about. We do for each other. Yeah, that's all. Like Veronica. God has imprinted on all created things his traces, trails, and footsteps. This was today's entry. Should have been anyhow. In the poor and outcast, we see the face of Christ. And that's why I love Camden more than anything else. Growing up in Philly, Camden was always the place. You lock your doors and drive as fast as you can. You had to go through it to go to the shore, right? So there was no avoiding it. And I never dreamed years ago that I'd be living there one day. But what's expanded my horizons is to see all these beautiful people. And I cannot tell you that I would say estimate half of the homeless people at our door or in our parking lot at the cathedral are young college-aged people. And I would say 90% of those issues are drug-related. It's so rampant. It's unbelievable. I had never known. And living in the cushy little white suburbs, you never saw this stuff. But now I see the reality right in front of me. And what I'm learning to see, thank God, is Jesus in all these folks. Now, I'm not here to judge them. I'm not asked why did you run away from home? Why are you on drugs? How'd you end up here? Because many of them are mentally ill, too. That's a big, we're here to give you a sandwich when you need it, or to not be afraid, to do things out of love, not fear. Dorothy Day used to say, anybody can hand out a dish of soup. And then she was grateful for all those volunteers that would come to the Catholic worker. She said, but it's when you sit down and actually meet people and talk to them and hear their story, that's where God happens, you know. It's not just about doing the good things because you're supposed to. It's really interacting with another person. Are you all familiar with Robert Coles, the great psychiatrist? Yeah, and he loved her, Dorothy, and he was a teacher at Yale. And he wrote the Catholic worker once in the 60s, and he said, I would love to bring my students down there for a week so that we can take a better look at mental illness on the streets and among the homeless. Can we stay at the Catholic worker? And she said, of course, we'd love to welcome you. So they set up an appointment. He arrived at St. Joseph House, and he said he was there right on time for their 1 o'clock appointment. And he said she was sitting across the room. It was a very small room, about a quarter of the size of this. And he said she was talking to a woman who was clearly drunk, a street woman, a bag lady, whatever you want to call her. And he said she was talking to her as if they were having a normal conversation. And at 5 after 1, she's still talking, and 10 after, he's starting to tap his foot, and it's kind of like, I came all the way here from Yale, and, blah, blah, blah. Finally, a quarter after, she came up to him and said, are you waiting to speak to one of us? And he said that totally disarmed him of all his self-importance, and he thought, this woman's the real deal. That in that moment, that woman was just as important as him, coming all the way, this famous psychiatrist. So, and they became very dear friends, and for years after, he was still taking his students there for a week to study that. And that was a Veronica moment, I think, that just shifting our gaze and seeing Christ in unexpected places. So the night before he died, Jesus sat and wrapped a towel around himself, and this is the great moment of Holy Thursday, of what we celebrate at that meal, teaching us to serve each other, the smallest, the humblest, In those days, Jesus was a religious leader who was one of a kind because the Jewish religious leaders never came out of the temple. They would never walk the streets with the people. When you brought your sacrifice, you never even saw the high priest. He was way up the top step, so nobody ever went up there in the Holy of Holies. Jesus was like the first preacher to really mix and mingle with the people, to get on the subway and talk, to have a cup of water with a woman that nobody else wanted to bother with, So that was what was new about him. So what we're always in danger of in Catholicism is turning things into a way in which we worship the ritual rather than the real reason for it in the first place. Now, I don't know if you have this going on in Boston, but down Philly way, it's still an issue. Can women have their feet washed on Holy Thursday? They drag in the 12 celibate white men because that's what the apostles were. Somehow they forgot Peter had a mother-in-law, but, well, that's beside the point. And we turn it into a ritual that totally overlooks what Jesus was teaching us in the first place, And so for that reason, when I painted this, I put toenail polish on this foot there. But this is what Pope Francis, and what may perhaps scare some of you, to do away with tradition. We're not doing, Pope Francis and what Pope John talked about too, is not doing away with the tradition of people having their feet washed, just broadening our horizons of who can and should be having their feet washed, not staying stuck in our little ways. I heard a wonderful quote that says, tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Isn't that beautiful? What a twist on things there. And it's so true. To get rid of the stuff and stop giving so much attention over to things that don't speak to us in the year 2014 anymore. We've come a long way. We don't stone young pregnant girls anymore. We fire them from Catholic schools. But we don't stone them to death. So shouldn't this, it's just think, just challenging us. I think the Pope's challenging all of us to think of what we can let go of and what we can keep, but nuance differently. So. That was the first time last year when we knew there was a new sheriff in Dodge, right? Cattery Tecaquitha is one of my favorites. I've been doing research. I've loved her ever since I was a kid. The part of Philly I grew up in used to be called the Lily White Northeast. Everybody in my world growing up was white and Catholic, except this little girl down the street named Susan Miller, who was Lutheran. And that was my brush with the exotic, right? Till I started taking art lessons in high school and was meeting black kids for the first time, and Puerto Rican kids, and Jewish kids, and learning every Saturday for 4 years of high school that my parents sent me for lessons. The high school I went to, an oblate school, didn't have art class. And I will never forget the morning my life changed. It was just 2 weeks before my first day of school, 9th grade. And I came down Saturday morning, and my dad was sitting at the kitchen table reading the Philadelphia Encore. And he said, I'm just reading here about the Moore College of Art downtown. He said they have art lessons for young people. He said, would you be interested in that? And before I knew it, 3 hours later, we were downtown signing me up for art classes. And I went for all 4 years. I learned to hate my Monday through Friday world and lived for Saturdays. Because not only was I learning art, I was allowed to travel on the L by myself for the first time, go downtown. There are people to this day in Northeast Philly that have never been downtown. I'm sure that's true here in Boston too. You know, we just get so provincial in our little ways of seeing things in our worlds. And I will forever be grateful that I had parents that said, no, there's more to this, that they supported my gift. They didn't say, you can't study art because there's no money in it. I never heard that once. When they knew that this was all I ever felt good at, the only place I had any kind of confidence, that's what they wanted to nurture, you know? And so I think that's why I have an affinity for people that feel like they're on the margins, especially if you feel like you're on the margins because of what the church taught you. You know, that's sinful. That's where the real evil is in our church. It's when any church that would ever make somebody feel bad about themselves. Oops, we're running out of power. Don't look ahead. I don't want to ruin any surprises. Okay, go away. We plugged you in. There she is. So I think that's one of the reasons why I loved Cattery Tecaquitha, this Mohawk girl from Albany area. And as an adult, I've grown to love her again. You know, for years I didn't give her much thought. But when that boy jumped off the George Washington Bridge several years ago, I just thought, and then we started hearing so much about bullying and in schools and all that. And I thought, I need to show kids that are being bullied or feel themselves on the margins, that are disabled, whatever, for whatever reason, kids don't feel a part of things, that this is their friend in heaven, because that's what happened to her. Cattery's parents died of smallpox. Now the Mohawks, which weren't always the nicest people in the whole world, in these days of political correctness, we forget that they were a warlike people. In fact, the word Mohawk means man-eating. There's hints that they were cannibals, that they used to eat their enemies. And anyhow, but they had their nice side too. But the French Jesuits came over. I don't want to badmouth our hosts here, but anyhow, they dressed in black, they had facial hair, all the stuff that the Native Americans didn't have at all, you know, and they thought they were demons, not missionaries, because what they brought with them was smallpox. Thousands of Indians, it's estimated that 50% of all Native Americans at the time that Cattery lived, 50% died of smallpox and other diseases that they never had before until the Europeans came over here. If you ever visit the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., there's a whole wall carved as the names of tribes that we know nothing about. They were just extinguished by disease and purposeful annihilation. What the British used to do, once they learned, ooh, there's smallpox, we can use this, chemical warfare, they gave purposely infected blankets to Indians, and that's how many died. Well, Cattery's parents were two of those, and her mom had just had a baby. And all three of them died of smallpox. And she, at the age of 3, got it herself, but she survived. And one of the effects of smallpox was not only did she have scars on her face, but she was almost blind. And the name Tecaquitha means the girl who walks with her hands out. She used to have to walk around so she didn't bump into anything. And all the other kids would laugh at her, push her, kind of abuse her. But the Jesuits were writing about her. They said, we have this girl here who is unlike any other Mohawk we ever met. She has a sweet, gentle, peaceful disposition. And in the midst of this stuff, in some ways she was respected because her father was the chief of the tribe, so that she always had that level of respect. But, kids being kids, they still ostracized her. She wanted to be like the other girls, but they wouldn't have it. Did I put that picture in now? So anyhow, turns out her mother was an Algonquin from Canada who had been taken prisoner by the Mohawks. And the Mohawk custom was after 2 years, they were treated as slaves when they took prisoners. But after 2 years, people were offered their freedom. Well, meanwhile, while she was there, she'd fallen in love with this guy, and she decided to stay. But she was a baptized Catholic. So at the age of 3, Kateri remembered, her mother was teaching her the basics of the faith and her prayers and whatnot. So meanwhile, now she's ostracized. In Mohawk spirituality, people who had afflictions and disabilities of any kind were considered to have bad spirits in them, the same reason they hated the Jesuits. And so that was another reason why she was kind of kept apart from everything. So she's sneaking off and talking to these Jesuit missionaries who are teaching her about a Jesus who accepts all people, teaching her about faith, peace in the midst of this warlike community and all that. And she's starting to put 2 and 2 together, and I remember my mother teaching me that. So she decided to embrace Christianity more and more, and at the age of 19 was baptized. Well, the bullying really stepped up, and they were totally abusing her, spitting at her, knocking her over, making her do the dirty work that the slaves did that nobody else wanted to do. But she was peacefully bearing all this. Well, one day, her uncle, who was raising her, wanted her to marry this young brave. And she, when she found Christianity, thought, I don't want to be part of Mohawk culture. This is not my world anymore, It's kind of one of those tough things. I love these people. They're my family, yet they're not my values anymore. She wanted desperately to be a nun. The rules of the church at the time said women of color were not allowed in the religious life. In the Southwest, it happened. People were beaten into submission to be baptized, but then never allowed to take the next step. They couldn't. The first black priest was ordained in the mid-1800s in Chicago, just to give you an idea. And that was, revolutionary at that time. So she had this mystic, contemplative spirit, and this guy followed her into the woods one day, and you can visit this tree she loved to pray at. If you ever visit her shrine outside Auriesville, New York, that's where her tomb is. Oh, no, her tomb's in Canada, but that's where her birthplace is. And they have a tree there with a plaque on it that this is the tree that she loved to pray under. It's a big, giant white oak. And there's a little viewing platform. And supposedly it is the very same tree that she would stop and pray for 1 hour on her way to the spring where she gathered the water, which is still there too. In any event, one day this brave followed her into the woods, and he said, if you don't marry me, I'm going to kill you. She told her spiritual director, and he said, all right, now bullying has turned into life-threatening stalking, So he said, we got to get you out of here. So with 2 companions, she walked from what is now Albany to Montreal to be with her mother's people in the village, which is still an Indian reservation today, called Kanawaki, just outside Montreal. Now, Montreal wasn't Montreal yet. Right there, it was just dirt roads, and French were setting up this port. And one of the founders of the city of Montreal was Sainte Marguerite Bourgeois, who runs a congregation of Sisters of Notre Dame, are still here. But in any event, so Kateri went up by canoe a lot of the trip, but a lot of it was on foot. Can you imagine walking through the New York wilderness like this, Tekakwitha? And she chose the name Kateri. It's the Mohawk version of Catherine. When she was learning about the saints, Catherine of Siena was her favorite saint. So she chose that name. And in Mohawk, everybody says Kateri. I was roundly yelled at for that. It's not Kateri, it's Kateri. And they said, think of it as, in French, Catherine is Catherine. So that was the Mohawks' attempt to say Catherine. It came out Kateri. But in any event, in Mohawk, it's Gadali. It doesn't sound anything like. But anyhow, she arrived at Kanawaki, and everybody loved her. It was like the early church. It was a gathering of all Christian Native Americans who had been baptized, and were now being ostracized by their native tribes. So from all over North America, people were gathering in Kanawaki. And that's where she spent her last 4 years on Earth. And they said she was devoted to working with the people of the tribe who had disabilities of some kind, or especially skin afflictions that nobody else wanted to go near because of that old hangover of spirituality. They were the very people she reached out to. And that's what I love her story. She didn't turn her own experience into anger and vengeance. She turned it into compassion and found a way to reach out. And they said one of the things that she loved to do was tell them jokes or make funny faces, and just to get them to laugh, because she felt humor was some of the best healing stuff going. Now, what she also did that we have a difficult time with in our age is inflict on herself severe self-penances, and way beyond whippings. I mean, she would physically, she died of natural causes, which were probably rooted in the awful things she was doing, not only fasting, not eating, starving herself, but just torture, what would they say, a cutter, like kids today that cut themselves. And I think that was the perfect storm of two things. Not that you want to lay blame anywhere, but it's her own native spirituality, which encouraged that, especially boys at 16, as their entrance into manhood, they have to do all kinds of horrible things to themselves in many native tribes. But also it was this French Jansenism that probably the Jesuits were bringing here too, a brand of Christianity which emphasized penance and, we're all horrible sinners, and, you have to make up for it and do these afflictions to yourself. Everybody in those days was into beating themselves and whipping themselves and all that. And so it was these two things together that influenced her to do these terrible things. But anyhow, as she's dying, the whole village was filing through in single file, and the Jesuits were singing hymns around her bed. And they said, at one point, she was unconscious, but at one point she raised her head from the pillow and said, Lesos Karnawanka, which is Mohawk for Jesus, I love you. And she put her head back and died, they said, with a beautiful smile on her face. And they said they continued their prayers, and within 10 minutes, all her scars dissolved right before their eyes. And she was lying there perfectly calm and beautiful with a smile on her face. And from that second, Kanawaki became a place of pilgrimage. So for 3 centuries, since 16, whatever she died, I forget dates, but people have flocked there to visit her. And she was just canonized 2 years ago with Hildegard of Bingen. And the miracle that got her over the top was a little boy in Seattle, Washington, a Native American kid, 8 years old, was out playing baseball. And I don't know what happened, got hit with a bat or something, but anyhow, caused a cut in his lip. And MRSA got in there, and it turned into this flesh eating. His face was literally being eaten away by this virus, and there was no cure for it. And the sister, I just met her the other week, the nun who was the hospital chaplain, said to his parents, we need to start praying to Kateri for a miracle. And she brought a relic in the next day, and the kid healed. It completely disappeared, and it was all right as soon as they started praying to Kateri Tekakwitha. So, and he went to the Vatican. I taught a woman last year, a Lutheran woman, who didn't know a whole lot about her, but she said, my little boy went and met the Pope. I said, what? Or her nephew, rather. She said, yeah, his best friend is the little kid who was cured. So it was in all the Seattle papers last year, and he was allowed to bring 3 friends with him. So they met Pope Benedict and all that, this little Lutheran boy, So they were all thrilled to hear this story. So here's my iPad version of Kateri. I thought I'd put the other things in. But Dorothy's approach was similar. There was no such thing as outcast. You're incast at the Catholic worker. No one was ever turned away unless they were disruptive or violent in some way. They're the only people that were ever asked to leave. And one time a woman, she was very, from what I understand, gracious when people were, her most important thing was writing her column for the Catholic worker. If you were to ask Dorothy Day, what do you do for a living? She would say journalist, first and foremost. Everything else was secondary. But she'd be in the middle of writing her columns, and people would want to come from all over to meet her, as she was gaining international fame. And she very graciously met them. And one time, one guy told me he went, and they said, oh yeah, just go upstairs, second door on the left, that's Dorothy's. And he said he could hear her typewriter going, and he knocked on the door, and he said she was nice as could be. He said she just said, just give me 10 minutes. I want to finish this article, and she said, I'll come out and talk to you. And So he said that she was so beautiful like that. And it just fits in with what I think Kateri was, to take her own experience of being outcast, as she was in her earlier life, and the Jewish people that she loved so much, and just sitting down and engaging people in conversation. That whenever, I've learned this too, I'm sure a lot of you, that when you see somebody coming your way that you think, oh God, here they come, and you want to go the other direction, it is so much easier, it turns out, to be as nice as can be to them for 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes of torture. You know, it's just how it works, you know? And that's the lessons of all these people, these Veronicas, who show us the face of Christ. So if you look for the face of Christ in the person that drives you nuts, you'll find it. So this was sketched right in the kitchen at St. Joseph's house where she lived, right before she moved to Mary house where she died. And here's the Christ child getting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Give drink to the thirsty. As I said, the works of mercy were really the real inspiration for Catholic worker houses. Visit the imprisoned. I already told her, she said, I got that one covered, you know. But she also used to gather people every Christmas to sing carols outside the women's jail in Manhattan. So that's what we see here. She got all her clothes from the donated clothes bin that was there. And her last great protest moment was in 1976, when she was almost 80, I guess. But she went out to California to be with Cesar Chavez and to protest for farm workers' rights. And she was jailed. There's a picture of her being handcuffed. And she was sent to jail with, I think, 30 other women. I also saw a photograph of her holding up her uniform. She had all the other women sign her uniform with her. And Joan Baez came to sing for her in prison. She was one of Joan Baez's great heroes back in the day, as was Thomas Merton. But what the genius of Dorothy was, she always told the Catholic workers, during Vietnam especially, don't just put make love, not war, or peace, or any of the stuff the hippies are doing on their signs. She said, I want you to put quotes from papal encyclicals, or scripture verses. So she said, when they come to us complaining, and she's meaning the church leaders, we can say, you're the ones that said this in the first place. So she knew papal encyclicals inside out. And Pope Paul VI said this. So Dorothy said, that's what we're putting on our placards. And you remember back then, it was on every bumper sticker, and you saw this line, if you want peace, work for justice. That's where it begins. It begins with equal education. You prevent all this stuff down the road, which we don't do in America. We're big on, let's build another jail, rather than how can we prevent this stuff from happening in the first place, And that's what Dorothy's thought was. She said, in this modern age, she said, I love St. Peter Claver. He used to work with the slaves, the boatloads of slaves that came in. She said, but in the modern age, she said, where are the people that are stopping slavery in the first place? That's what the real work of the saint is today. It's not tending them after they're here. It's let's make sure there is no slavery. So my next door neighbor for a couple years there was this man, right next door to my studio. When I first moved in there, he would always be out front. He was drunk from, I'd say, 7:30 in the morning all day long. And his friends would show up at 3 o'clock. He didn't have a radio inside, so they had their truck, and they would blare Spanish music. He didn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish, except más cerveza, por favor. And the school was right across the street, Sacred Heart School. So they even had to complain to him, you're disrupting class with this radio and all that. And I was just a little... when I first moved there, I thought, oh, God, I hated to go out my front door, if he was out there. But I thought, I can't live like this either. I'm not going to be held captive in my own place. So that became my prayer. Help me find you in here, God. Well, one day, we were friendly. We exchanged, hello, how you doing? That's as much as either of us could say to the other. And one day I was coming home from stations on Good Friday, and he stopped me, and he said, in broken English, he said, you're my friend. And he said, I want to wash your car for you. Even he noticed that my car tends to be a little... If you could have seen his backyard, you would die. Oh, my God. It almost prevented me from moving in the first place. I thought, God only knows what's out there. The only way he made money was scrap metal. Camden is the scrap metal capital of the country. There's mountains of it. Father Doyle calls it the Camden Alps. Just this huge heap. So he would, anytime, nothing was safe in the neighborhood. He was the neighborhood menace. Kids' bikes, anything that was metal, he would steal. And one day I heard this noise, I'm painting, and it's my favorite. And he called me Poppy, and so I always called him that. But I look out the window, and there's Poppy with his son. They had a traffic signal. And they're trying to saw it with two little saws into pieces to take it over to the scrap metal yard. And I thought, oh my God, it's come to this. So anyhow, he started washing my car for me. And that became his gesture to show me peace. He'd say, when I was off to Mass, pray for me, and pray for me. I love Mary, I love Jesus. And I thought, he and all the other folks I think kept there, but for the grace of God go I. I don't know what his life was like. He was probably illiterate. Clearly had a drinking problem, maybe a drug problem too, I don't know. But I just thought, I'm not here to look at any of that. I don't know the circumstances, so how can I judge them? And it's just, kindness goes a long way. It changed my life. So with the next Good Friday, he stopped me and told me, my mother and I are moving. And my immediate thought was mixed. One was like, oh, thank God. But the other was, I'm sad, because he had taught me a lot without knowing it over the last couple of years. And so I said, I had my sketchbook with me. I said, can I draw you? And so we sat like this, and I drew him, and that's where this drawing came from. And he was so proud. He almost cried when and I showed it to him. And he moved. I haven't seen him since. And the neighborhood's a lot cleaner and quieter. But anyhow, it's all by way of saying, I guess that was Veronica coming, and it just makes your life so much happier if you just accept and look for Christ in the moment rather than resisting or being fearful. Francis de Sales, you say, do all through love, nothing through fear. Look for the love moment. And so that leads us to the weeping women of Jerusalem. And he said, don't weep for me, weep for your children. Pope Francis, dear young people, do not be satisfied with a mediocre life. Be amazed by what is true and beautiful, what is of God. So that's where the title of the book comes from. Sometimes when he tweets, he puts, dear young people. And remember last year at the World Youth Day, told them, go home and make some noise, shake things up. He said, even if it means being at odds with your bishops and priests. Isn't that awesome? God, it's like, where'd this guy come from? Where have they been hiding him all these years? So the weeping women, I want to share some child images. The presentation in the temple is a joyful mystery of the rosary. In the days following my dad's death, in time of grief, I had a whole different take on that joyful mystery. And I thought that wasn't all about joy. And what I learned was that the presentation was a Jewish custom, and it was the first time a woman who had just had a baby was allowed out of the house in 40 days. 40 days after a son's birth. If it was a daughter, 80 days. And what it really was, it wasn't just presenting him to the temple, it was the cleansing, the ritual cleansing of her dirty woman body. When women were menstruating, you weren't allowed to touch them or shake their hands or any of that stuff. And that's what all this came out of. So she goes to the temple, thrilled to be out of the house for the first time. You can imagine 40 days with a screaming baby? I'd go nuts. I remember one time my dad came home from work and said to my mother, oh, we have to go to a viewing tonight. Somebody at work died. And she said, oh, good, what time should I be ready? She was like, even going to a viewing. So anyhow, here's Mary handing her baby over, and we have Simeon's words hovering in the air. You yourself shall be pierced with a sword. And so this is about the both and of life that I think we learn as we get older, that life's not an either or black and white deal, If you're looking for God in the black and white surety of it all, you ain't going to find God there. God's in your heart and in your own mess, in your own story, in your own bad memories, as well as your happy ones. That it's the blessing and curse of life that this is about. So the double-edged sword of love is coming right down in the background as she cries and kind of knows the future, as any parent does, and who knows what she knew about Jesus' actual future, but any parent, I would assume, knows when you have a baby that you're so in love with, that what's waiting down, the toughness of life, the cattery moments, that you can't protect them from. We all have to learn in our own hard way. So here's the sales. After sin, the worst affliction for a soul is anxiety. Don't weep for me, weep for your children. This was the post on St. Patrick's Day, so that's why it's St. Francis O sales. In marriage, there are arguments, and sometimes plates go flying. Never end the day without making peace, which sometimes only takes a small gesture. Another bit of genius from Pope Francis. The Holy Spirit is saying, come on, you two, work with me here. Did you ever hear of Hal Roach, the great Irish comic? He had a line, he said, my wife and I have our arguments just like any married couple. He said, but years ago when we first got married, we promised each other we would never go to bed angry at each other. One time we were up for 8 months. Oh, I got this all in the wrong order here. I knew I'd put it in here, but this is Cattery being taunted by the mean girls of the tribe. Oh, Mary McKillop, you know all about her. First Australian saint. And I happened to be visiting a friend who's Australian, a pastor up in Canada, right at the weekend of her canonization. So I did this drawing as a gift for him, but love her story. She's another one, excommunicated. You gotta love this. I cannot tell you how many women saints were excommunicated. Saint Mother Theodora Guerin in Indiana was excommunicated because the Bishop of Indiana said she was too free-thinking. And she went out of town to raise money for their school, St. Mary's in the Woods. And while she was out of town, he went and visited the other nuns, and he said, you got to vote her out of office because she's not allowed back in the state anymore. And they said to him, we don't listen to tyrants. Can you imagine? And he was taken out of office a couple years later. Apparently that wasn't the only stupid thing he did. And so you love these saints that were excommunicated. And that's what you love about Catholicism. Excommunicate you one century, canonize you the next, Mary McKillop founded the first women's religious order in Australia. And it was set up as the first congregation that was not under the rule of thumb of a bishop. With Vatican approval, she said, our congregation will always have an elected mother superior who makes the decisions, that we don't want to have to kowtow to a bishop anywhere. Well, that set her off on the wrong foot. All the bishops of Australia hated her right off the bat. She's sending her nuns off into the outback to get the blooming onions and to educate the orphans and the Aborigine, all that, grueling. They went out on stagecoaches and wagons and opened hospitals and orphanages. Well, she went to the bishop when she found out that one of the priests was abusing one of the boys in her school. And turns out the priest happened to be the bishop's best friend. So he excommunicated. Instead of doing something about it, he excommunicated her. And under the guise of she's too free-thinking. In her whole community, they're just doing whatever they want. They're not listening to the magisterium of the church. You always throw that word in there to scare you, magisterium. But so 6 months later, he died. So justice was served. On his deathbed, he admitted that what he had done was wrong, and he lifted the excommunication. So by the time she died, she was back in everybody's good graces. But I just love, I think that was some of the wisdom with Pope Benedict to name her a saint right at the height of the abuse cry. You've heard that we had one? And so it was kind of a way to say, the church, we're here and we want to be part of the healing process, I who love saints so much, that's my favorite part of Catholicism. I think it's wonderful that Pope Benedict did that, that to say we have an ally in heaven to kind of help us get beyond, like Hildegard. And that's what John the 23rd, I want to make the human sojourn on earth less sad. He was like a stand-up, he once said, in Italy there's 3 ways for a man to lose all his money: gambling, women, and farming. And he said, and my father chose the most boring. So the whole last couple pages of my book are little cartoons inspired by his actual quotes and quips. One time, this is when he was the papal nuncio in Paris, right as World War II was ending. So they needed somebody with a strong diplomatic skill to make peace. You know, there's pro-Nazi bishops to be dealt with and clergy and, you know, all the devastation of France after the Nazis. So he was the man to send for the job. So and he loved it. And he was fluent in French. And he set up his house. He lived simply, but he said, this is really about the people. So he started throwing these wonderful dinners that became the toast of the town. Everybody wanted to go to be invited to his dinner table. He always loved everything French. A little side note that has nothing to do with any of this, but I read that the longest audience he had with any single person while he was Pope was with Jackie Kennedy. She had gone over there, and he was being coached all day how to address her, Mrs. Kennedy. You know, she's the most famous woman in the world, and he was excited to meet her, and they kept saying, you have to call her this, you have to do that. And when the moment came, she was brought in the room, he stood up and opened his arms, and he said, Jackie! And they met for, I think, an hour in a private meeting and spoke in fluent French to each other. That's how they was able to communicate. But in any event, so he's having these dinners in Paris, and these women are coming, French actresses and others, in very low-cut gowns. And there are two wonderful stories about it. One time, he was sitting next to a woman in a very low-cut dress, and the fruit bowl was brought out for dessert, and he said to her, you want to eat an apple? And she said, why? Pourquoi? And he said, because when Eve ate an apple, she realized she was naked. And another time, maybe it was the same dinner, I don't know, but a woman in a low-cut dress was there, and one of the other cardinals or whoever leaned over and said, do you want us to ask her to leave? He said, I can't believe she would wear a dress like that to such an occasion. He said that everybody's staring at her. And he said, maybe we should ask her to go. And Pope John, or then Archbishop said, he said, no, you can't ask her to go. That would be rude. He said, but besides, they're not staring at her. They're staring at me to see if I'm staring at her. So he never forgot his earthiness. He was a poor peasant till the day he died. He said that near his deathbed. He said, I was born poor and I'm going to die poor. And that's the family I came from. So he was very proud of that. I'm your brother, John. Dorothy was the same. She loved her grandchildren. She had 35 great-grandchildren at the time of her death. Her own daughter, Tamar, had 8 children of her own, and then they had kids, so there were 35. Not a churchgoer among any of them. So those of you who have kids that aren't going to church, you're in very good company. When St. Dorothy Day their own kids didn't do it. Her granddaughter, Martha Hennessy, is now very actively involved in all things Dorothy, and she's a wonderful person. I met her at the Catholic Worker 2 years ago, and she even wears her hair, white hair, like Dorothy Day did, and she's very proud of her grandmother and is doing a lot to promote Catholic Worker. But in any event, Dorothy had loved her grandchildren. When you read her letters and journal, she loved any opportunity to go. They lived in Vermont, and when her daughter had to go away, Dorothy would go and babysit them. And as they got older, she still loved being with them, but in her one journal entry, you gotta love it, she's getting a little older and a little cranky. And she said, I love my grandchildren, she said, but I couldn't wait to get out of there because they play their rock and roll music so loud. And she said, my granddaughter's skirts are so short, but God forbid her mother say anything to her, and I don't want to say anything. So it was like all this typical grandmom stuff, and which only makes her sainthood even more special, you know, that she got it. So here she is. This is based on a photograph. They didn't have the birthday hats, but she had to bake the cake for one of her grandkids' birthdays. Oh, and it says, these things I will remember as I pour out my soul, how I would lead the rejoicing crowd amid cries of gladness and thanksgiving, the throng wild with joy, from the Psalm 42. 2 years ago, next door, after Poppy moved out, he was replaced by this little boy who the year before, at the age of 9, was playing in the streets of East Camden when a drug gang thing broke out. Fire was exchanged, gunfire, and he was playing in the street. and a bullet went right through and blinded him for life. And through Father Doyle, the pastor at Sacred Heart, and a whole retinue of contributors, including John Bon Jovi, the singer, who does a lot for social justice causes in New Jersey. But they raised money. Father Doyle has rehabbed 200 houses in Camden for the poor. It's like a Habitat for Humanity. It's called the Heart of Camden, all done through Sacred Heart Church. And this was one of those houses. They rehabbed it so that George, his name's Jorge, but he prefers George, and his grandmother would have a place to live. So to much fanfare, they moved in. The local TV news came over, and they filmed the whole event. And George announced that he had never been baptized. And he said, so that Pentecost Sunday at the 10:30 Mass, he was baptized, and he asked the police commissioner to be his godfather. And that's what inspired this picture here. The police commissioner was horrified, of course, when this whole event happened, the shooting in the first place. Camden is considered the most violent and dangerous city in the country. And we're number 3 poorest now. We used to be number 1. We're number 1 at something. Now they even took that away from us. But in any event, it is a very dangerous city. And the police commissioner he has 3 little boys of his own, but he just took George under his wing. And so he was the godfather of George. And we loved it in the neighborhood because we never saw so many police cars all of a sudden. They were always patrolling. And George went to a new school for the blind, for special kids. And but anyhow, this is a St. Joseph image to me here, or a Veronica or a Simon, any of the people that we've been talking about, the living saints, you know, who are just doing God's work for us here. So every year at the Hearts and Hands Festival, they shut the street down in June for one day, Saturday, and it's the parish's gift to the local neighborhood community. And they have the Philly fanatic comes over, and they have games and food, you know, hot dogs and hamburgers for the kids, and they set up a concert stage, and there's singers all day long, everything from hip hop to opera, you know, and it's just there as a street festival. So I was sketching it the first year I moved in there, and I was sitting on the front stoop, and just as I was in that spot, I cut the church in half because I ran out of paper. It's really much longer than that. But just as I was in that spot, this little boy was standing there watching me, and he said, "Would you put me in your drawing?" So I sketched in his face and he said, "Oh, that's cool. Can I have it?" And I said, "No." I said, "But you can sign your name." So he put his name just underneath there. But ever since, I thought, that's the Christ child. You know, that this is why, you know, people say, especially in Philly, if I tell people I live in Camden, the look of horror on their faces you know, you can understand it because all they see is the news every night. But I've never been happier. I said, how could you not? You know, there's so much that the churches are doing beneath the surface. And if I believed that Camden was nothing more than murder and mayhem, then I'd be afraid to live there too. But you can't live in fear, you know? You just use common sense. I know where to go and how to go, and I would never walk anywhere. But that little face there, you know, it's like, when I look at the kids running into Sacred Heart School and know what their future is, that there's a 70% high school dropout rate in the city of Camden, and that they're real cute when they're running to school at kindergarten, but you just think, oh my God, when you get to high school, selling drugs is going to be a lot easier and your schools don't have computers, so they don't stand a chance of measuring up against the other kids coming out of the suburban schools. God, don't even think of college, you know. So that's where the heartbreak comes in, and so you just want to be a presence in the midst of that, you know, and that's what makes me happy, to be able to do that. One day I was coming around the corner, and there was a grandmother in an electric wheelchair bringing her little kid, kindergartner, to Sacred Heart that morning. She still had her pajamas on. It was a cold winter day, and she's crossing Broadway, this very busy street. And her little thing, and the little boy was standing on the front of that wheelchair like Leonardo DiCaprio on the front of the Titanic. And I just thought, wow, that's Camden to me. It's this grandmother saying, I want my kid at Sacred Heart, and there he is, and by hook or by crook, she was there bringing that kid to school. That's Jesus at work, you know, and all the work you're doing. I don't mean to, it's not like it just happens in Camden. Whatever you do at home, whatever your talents are, you are doing the work of Simon, you know, and that's why it's important for you to hear that. It's easy to forget when you get caught up in all the administrative crap, and I use that word purposefully, of working for church. I say that to people all the time. There's nothing worse for your faith life than working for the church. And I'm sorry if I offend some of you, but it's the truth. And I can tell by your laughter that a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, I cannot imagine a Christian who does not know how to smile. Pope Frank. The death of Jesus. Ooh, we better get moving here, huh? Here's St. Joseph. This is called Son of Joseph. And it's for all of you who know what it's like when the roles change in life and the child becomes the parent. And Joseph is the patron saint of the dying because, of course, we assume that he died in the presence of Jesus and Mary. I remember as a kid, my mother used to pray to him all the time for a happy death. And we'd think, oh, that's so weird, you know. But, of course, guess who's doing it now, you know, as I get closer to it. And this is Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus with Mary and Martha. And this was influenced. It goes back to what I was saying, you know, we've got to find Scripture in our own lives and realities. One of my dearest friends was killed. He fell asleep at the wheel. He was a fellow oblate who had just left dinner with the bishop who was going to ordain him 3 months later. And it was 2 weeks before his 35th birthday. And he was heading to the Jersey Shore, and he fell asleep just 10 minutes from where he was supposed to be on the Garden State Parkway, and the car overturned and he was killed. And at his viewing, I was hugging his 2 sisters by his coffin. And that's where this image came from. I thought, I'm with Mary and Martha, because John tells us Jesus wept at that, and that he considered these people like sisters and brother to him, you know. And so there's Mary and Martha giving Jesus comfort. And I thought, you never see pictures. You know, Jesus always, as rightfully so, dispensing the comfort. But he had to learn it somewhere, you know. This is where he picked it up. This is how he learned how to do it, through these women, you know. And so that says, vita mutator non toliter, the Latin words from the funeral rite, which means life is changed, not ended. And in that beautiful story, in the very next passage, Jesus passes through there on his way to Palm Sunday. It said he went to Bethany, and they had dinner and celebrated Lazarus coming back to life, and that Lazarus and Jesus were sitting right next to each other at the table. Life is changed, not ended. You know, that's the beauty. That's what we cling to. That's what when we learn to embrace the cross, whatever your cross is. There's Pope John, and this is based on a sketch of an artist, 2 artists, so I don't have time to tell you their stories, but they're wonderful if you want to look them up. Frederick Frank was an American Quaker who adored Pope John because of his emphasis on peace, being a Quaker, you know, it's a big thing to him. Uninvited, he flew to Rome when Vatican II opened just to support John. He didn't know a soul. Through one connection and another, he was finally able to meet a cardinal. Before you knew it, by the end of Vatican II, he had sketched every cardinal in private sittings, and he said that's where he was learning stories. You know, not one of them turned him down. You know, everybody likes to have their sketch done, you know. And he adored Pope John, and this was a drawing. My drawing is based on his drawing when he said Pope John came out for his last public appearance, and it was unknown by then that he had stomach cancer and was dying, and he said he looked horrible. And so, he was so sad that this friend he never even met personally was dying. But Pope John loved the crucifix, and he showed someone in his room once, he had a crucifix, and he said, see that crucifix? This was to another visiting cardinal. He said, every night, he said, I cannot tell you how it breaks my heart to think of all those people who feel they've been condemned by the church. And he said, my response is to open wide my arms and love them, just as Jesus did. And here he is again. He had a crucifix right at the foot of his bed. He said, so it's the first thing I see in the morning when I get up and the last thing at night. And he said, and I speak to it in the afternoons every day. He took his walks. He hated that he could not walk around Rome. He said, they're keeping me like a prisoner here. He told this to the official sculptor, Giacomo Manzu, who the Curia hated because he was a communist atheist, and they said he shouldn't be in the Vatican and all that. And Pope John and he became very dear friends because they could speak dialect. They were from the same town in Italy. And he shared with him, he said, they have me like a prisoner. He said, I can't make a move without somebody telling me you have to do this and that and the other. And he said, I would love to walk. And he said, and what I want to do is turn the Vatican Gardens into a playground so the children of Rome could dig tunnels and climb trees in a safe environment and get off the dangerous streets of Rome. He said, but to do something like that takes power from somebody more than the Pope. He said, you can't change rules around here. So he'd love to take these walks in the garden. Pius, all the popes before him, used to take daily walks in the Vatican gardens too, but everything had to be evacuated, so they never had to see anybody. Pope John insisted that they stay. He knew every gardener, every landscaper by name, how many kids they had, whose kids was sick. He would ask for them by name. One day he stopped one of them and he said, how much money are we paying you? And the guy, he said, you have 6 kids. And the guy told him, and he said, we're a church that's starting to talk about justice. He said, that won't do. He said, we have to practice. And he raised the salaries doubled the salaries of every Vatican employee after. So that's what he got from riding the subway, just being out there and mingling with the people. So there's Vita Mutator Non Tolitur again. He accepted death graciously. He would pray every day, Sister Death. He said, and I want to be ready and I want to die poor. He hated the clothing that they had him, He showed somebody his closet with all the ornate vestments and all that stuff, and he said, I don't want any of that, The shoes, he said, were torture. The red shoes. He said, it's all a plot to prevent me from walking around wherever I want. I don't think we have time to get into this because I want to do something with you. But here's Dorothy Day, and I just want to show you the cross in her life. She was passionately, madly in love with the father of her child, Tamar. His name was Forster Batterham, who was an atheist, didn't want to hear anything about religion. And she got pregnant. This is the early 20s. They're just living together, without being married. He didn't want to have anything to do with marriage, the institution. She would beg him all the time. Anyhow, she got pregnant. And he said, I'm not ready to be a father. I don't want this. But she had the baby. And she realized, I don't want this baby growing up in the same restless life that I've been living. So she used to see a nun walking on the beach every day, a sister of charity. And she stopped her one day. She said, Sister, she said, I just had a baby. And she said, I'm not Catholic and I'm not married, but could I be baptized? Or could I have the baby baptized? And the sister said, absolutely. And she, as I said before, RCIA, she used to come and give instructions to Dorothy 3 days a week whenever Forster was out of town. He would have gone through the roof if he knew this was going on. And so it was all secret. And sister kept saying to her, I don't know how you're going to raise this baby Catholic if you're not Catholic yourself. So she said, I decided, oh, what the heck, I kind of like what I'm hearing, I'll become Catholic too. She took the subway, the Staten Island ferry over and was baptized on Staten Island. And she said it was a very joyless day. She said, I didn't regret it, but I had no joy around it. She said, I didn't understand why I was becoming Catholic. I didn't know anything except the pious stories of saints that Sister Aloysia taught her. She said she used to teach me my catechism and also managed always to sneak in criticism of my housekeeping skills. Good old Sister Aloysia there. And anyhow, that's when her relationship broke up with Forster. She said they would fight. This went on for a couple of years. She would beg him. When you read her letters, I'm telling you, they're so passionate. She was totally everything. He was everything in her life. And she said, you don't have to know I'm Catholic. I won't keep my statues around or my books or any of that stuff. She said, I'll go to Mass for 1 hour on Sunday morning and you can watch the baby and I'll come home and I won't tell you about Mass. She said, religion doesn't have to, well, they could never get past it. They would scream at each other. He'd leave her, he'd come back, and he'd leave, he'd come back. This went on for so long that finally they said, enough is enough. You got to go. But she loved him the rest of her life. She moved to California just to get away from him. She came back to New York. That's when she met Peter Marin. She's praying fervently, God, show me what to do. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and I'm losing my faith. She lost every single friend in her life. Not one stuck by her when she converted. Because they said, you're turning over to the enemy. How can you be part of the Catholic Church and the corruption and the hypocrisy? And Forster left her. She had nothing. And so Peter Marin knocks on her door one day, and he said, somebody connected us, and he said, I have a dream for something called the Catholic Worker, and I'm told you can help me out. So he was the brains behind the outfit. She was the heart. She said right there in her living room, it was born. They made soup. It's the height of the Depression. And she said a week later they needed soup enough for 1,500 people and a house to put them in. She said, men were roaming the streets looking for work in New York, depression, all that. And she said, how can we get the word out? I'm a journalist. Let's start a newspaper. So they started the Catholic Worker, and she said, we can't just give it away. It won't mean anything. Let's charge a penny. To this day, it's just a penny a copy. But she told Catholic workers, she said, leave them on park benches and on subway cars, leave them everywhere you go. That's how we'll get it out. She said, we're competing with the communists on May Day. They had that beautiful newspaper, and she said, will have to be the Catholic alternative to communism. And so that's what they did. So they made 1,500 copies the very first time. A month later, they needed 25,000 copies. And a year later, they were printing 150,000 copies of that paper. It just took off through her and her journalism skills. And that became, she wrote a column weekly, and that became, or monthly, whenever it came out. Well, here's my favorite story beyond all the heroic, saintly things she did. When Forster left her, he took up with another woman named Nanette. And at one point, and he used to, once the baby was born, he loved her. And he wanted to be as good a dad as he could. She was raising the child in the Catholic Worker House, so that set up a whole other set of issues. That's for another workshop. But in any event, he would frequently come to the Catholic Worker to see his daughter. And so he and Dorothy were cordial, pleasant. But meanwhile, he had taken up with Nanette. One point, he comes to Dorothy and he says, Nanette just found out she has cancer. Can you help us out? We have nowhere to go. So Dorothy gave them a cottage that she owned on Staten Island. Not only that, it was this cottage right there, that greenhouse. She would go every day and visit Nanette and hold her hand, change her bandages, tell her stories, just comfort her. I met their next door neighbor. He said as soon as Dorothy arrived, Forster just couldn't handle it. These two women that he loved, he always loved Dorothy too, but they just couldn't get. And he said he would leave the house and go for a walk for 2 hours. And Dorothy would be inside changing her bandages and being kind to her. And at one point, Nanette said, when I get over this, which she never did, she said, but when I get over this, I want to sell everything I own and be like Dorothy because she has shown me Jesus. And the night before she died, she asked for a priest and was baptized on her deathbed. And that, I thought, that's Dorothy. All the big social justice stuff, wonderful, but that tells you she was the real deal, that she owned in her heart. She took the cross of her life. She channeled all her passionate energy that she had reserved only for him. And we wouldn't have a Catholic Worker today if it weren't for her being willing to give that over, And so it changed her life too. It took a toll. She immediately announced she was going out west for 6 months just to get away from him again and go to the West Coast. But it brought him back into her life till the day she died. He called at least once a day. They became very close friends. Again, he would come to the Catholic Worker for coffee, and they'd get together all the time. And he frequently brought her religious prints, art that he saw on the streets. He'd see vendors selling stuff, and he'd bring them because she loved to hang posters and prints around. And he remained an atheist till the day he died. But at her funeral, they said he was the most he and their daughter Tamar led the funeral procession from Mary House around the corner to the church where her funeral event was. There was only one bishop at her funeral, and he was Episcopalian. She was world-renowned by this point. In his defense, Cardinal Cook was the cardinal at the time, and he was a big fan of Dorothy's. But he had something else that I don't know what it was, but he just said he felt he could not, that it was more important on his schedule. So what he did was he met the coffin at the front door of the church and blessed it, and then he went on his way. And 2 months later, he had a memorial mass for her at St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was filled. So, but it is ironic, no auxiliary bishops, no other high dignitaries from the Diocese of New York attended her funeral. And one woman wrote that when she went up to communion, when she came back, one of their homeless regular guests, a woman, had stretched out on the pew and was taking a nap, and right in her spot. And she said, I knew this was Dorothy Day's funeral. And she said, I just laughed and thought, this is a real Catholic Worker funeral here. And one of their other homeless men that was there all the time threw himself on the coffin and was wailing, saying, nobody else ever tried to talk to us. What are we going to do without her? So go in peace. This is Sacred Heart Church. The cross is there because a woman was shot and killed 2 years ago right across the street from Sacred Heart. She was getting a sandwich and she was caught in a gunfire. She had a 2-year-old in the car. Father Doyle went over to bless her and see what was going on. He said he'll never forget this little 2-year-old with his face and hands against the window who had just witnessed this woman who was putting herself through college, shot to death right before his eye. You know. And Father Doyle's the one who had that so when you're leaving the church, it's an old church from 1800s, but he had that new glass put in there as a reminder of that's what we do here when we leave Mass, you know, go in peace. And finally, images of the resurrection. That's what we're all building up to. But I'm going to, we all know the story, right? So I'm more anxious for you to do the next thing. Here's Mary Magdalene at the tomb with a bouquet of flowers, all symbolic to her in the Middle Ages. People had gardens of Mary Magdalene. You may recognize this is Mary with a beard. He's now Nicodemus. That's one of the nice things, drawing on an iPad. You can easily... I always love Nicodemus. Do I have to go back in my mind? You know, he met Jesus in secret in the dead of night. And don't we all do that, you know, afraid what others will think. And this is a picture that my most recent church commission, a pastor in Philadelphia, commissioned it. It's 100th anniversary of the parish called BVM, and he said, I want a Marian picture. He said, but I want it connected to the addiction community. He said, this parish is a big AA center for the region. So this is Our Lady of Light, Help of the Addicted. And she's holding a broken cocktail glass with beauty growing from it. And the lotus is a symbol of inner enlightenment. The gold rose is a symbol of the glorious mysteries of the rosary, and the lily, of course, for Easter resurrection. And the 12 stars, which are traditional in any painting of Mary, here are the 12 steps of recovery. And the words on either side say, come to the aid, assist your people who have fallen, yet strive to rise again. From a beautiful ancient prayer called the Alma Redemptoris, Gate of Heaven, Star of the Sea, assist your people who have fallen, yet strive to rise again. And so, people always ask, what's the point of the cloth? There's nothing. I just needed a little splash of color down there. But it's, but to hold up the broken glass too, that light, the light in this picture is growing right from that brokenness. That, you know, a quote, it's a Leonard Cohen song about, that's why our hearts are cracked so the light can get through. You know, and that's what this is. That's what everything I've been saying today is about. You know, just embracing the darkness, not fleeing from it, not knowing that God loves you and supports you no matter what's going on. You know, God wants you to be better. It's not there with the clipboard judging. You know, we do that to each other, not God. So Pope Francis, our infinite sadness can only be cured by infinite love. And that's a worthy one to leave on. What I want to do now, there's paper and pen there. And I want to make sure we use it so Melinda didn't go to all that trouble to get it for me. But this is a drawing exercise. But you're going to love it. I love the looks on people's faces when I announce this. I always say it's my way of getting revenge for all those years I had to hear, it's time for gym class. This is something I've been doing with groups for 15 years. And this is for you, although maybe you'll end up doing it in your work, although little kids wouldn't get it. But what I'm going to have you do, there you go, is hold the, I don't care which way you hold the paper, landscape or what do you call this, a portrait. Used to be horizontal and vertical, but all of a sudden. And I'm going to have you draw 5 shapes, all right? I will tell you what they are, but make them big enough that you can fit 5 of them, one underneath the other, leaving the rest of the paper blank so that when I explain what this was all about, you'll want to write it out so you can do it at happy hour later with your friends. And what this is a drawing exercise that helps you see where you are spiritually right now in this present moment of your life, all right, through symbol. It's from a book called Signs of Life by Angeles Arian, who's a cultural anthropologist. And she wrote this book. She has studied all the world's religions, the symbols and signs, thousands of them, and she said these 5 shapes are the most common in all cultures and religions around the world. And they mean basically the same thing. And the first thing I'd like you to draw is a square. Do we have an extra piece of paper at anybody's table? Thank you. Yeah, one underneath the other. So under the square, put a circle. Or a football, that's fine. Next, a triangle. Next, a spiral or a coil, but not like a tornado. Think of your thumbprint or the coil on an electric stove. One of those, you know, like a little spiral. Perfect. And lastly, a cross, but not just two lines. Make it like the shape of a cross you see on a first aid kit. You know, so it's a shape, like a plus sign shape. Perfect. Everybody have that? Next, I'd like you, what we're going to do is number them. I'd like you to go to the shape you like best, not because of the way you drew it or the way it turned out, but because you like that shape best today, and put a number 1 next to it. And then number them 1 through 5, so that 5 is your least favorite. Okay? Everybody have that? Don't think too much, because this is more about instinct, you know, your inner. And if you had trouble deciding between two, pay attention to what they each mean, because they're probably equally coming to you, all right? But what I'm going to do now is explain to you what the shapes symbolize, and then, more interestingly, what it means in the order that you just put them, all right? So you see how psycho you are. Although I can tell already in a few cases, I guess I've been looking around. Okay, the square is the symbol of stability and security. Feeling a little unstable, are we over there? Stability and security. The circle is the symbol of wholeness and unity. I'll go back and explain all this, put a little flesh around all of it more specifically. So wholeness and unity. The triangle is goals and dreams. Goals and dreams. Goals. What's next? The spiral is change and growth. Ooh. And the cross is relationship and balance. Relationship and balance. Now the psycho part. Whatever you labeled number 1 is what you're working on these days. Number 2 represents what you're good at these days, the energy you're using. In your quest for 1, you're kind of using a lot of the energy that comes with whatever you labeled number 2. And again, I'll get more specific about that, so that might make a little more sense. Number 3 represents your deepest spiritual desire. What you want more than anything else in your heart of hearts. Some of you thinking I'm a psychic right now? Is that a... Number 4 is your finished business. It's been there, done that. That's why you put it down there towards the bottom, because it's like, I'm over that. 4 represents a challenge that you've had in life recently. You interpret recently however you want. But, no, 4. I'm still on 4. It's this challenge that you had in life that you grew from and you moved on, all right? So that's what the finished business means, okay? 5, if you'd all just calm down, I'm getting there, is your unfinished business. It's the thing you wish would just leave you the hell alone. If you're Jungian, it's your shadow side. Your number 1's your persona, what you show to the public. 5 is your darker side. And I haven't looked closely at any, but having done this for 15 years with all kinds of groups, it's a good bet that those of you who have a spiral 1 have a square 5. I'm not just another handsome face. I gotta. And the reason is that they're the 2 most opposite shapes, as we'll see. All right? The square, if you have this in your 1, 2, 3 region, the square energy is the person that I like to call the responsible adult in the room. You are drawn to that shape because it makes sense. You come down 1, there's a nice angle. You know where to go next. You know where to get. It's neat and tidy. It makes sense. Square energy is for those people who love. You might hear yourself saying, and this is how most parishes and schools are run, we've never done that before. You like the predictable, the tried and true. You like routine. You like things to be black and white and explained easily. If you ask a square friend out for dinner next week, they will say, yes, what time you picking me up, who's driving, how we getting there, I'll make the reservations. They're the planners, the organizers, they like everything, all that square stuff. And what else with the square? In church, I always love to show, they're good, they're very reliable. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound negative, because they're organized. They're reliable, they're tried and true. If you're an employer and you want to give this test to a prospective employee, you want the square as the person that you know is going to stay loyal to the company. They're going to show up at 9, they're going to leave at 5, they're going to give you their best work in between those hours, and they're going to probably prefer the back room and do the accounting, not have to deal with people up front. It's kind of like, I'm just coming in, I'm doing my job, and that's it. That's all square, that's all good squareness. Each of these has a negative trait and a fear as well. And if you're all about square energy, when you're in your negative squareness, you're inflexible. You have difficulty dealing with change. You don't like newness. It's kind of, you're the traditionalist as opposed to that's would be a negative aspect of squareness. In terms of liturgy or Jesus, it's when Jesus says, I'm the cornerstone, It's the altar in church. It's the big block of marble that's this rock of stability. And that's a beautiful thing. If you're a big spiral person, you need a spouse or partner, business partner, that's a square. If you're hiring a business accountant for your own personal sake, make sure you're hiring a square. You don't want a spiral handling your checking or bills. If you're redesigning your kitchen, you want a spiral, not a square, because the square's going to make it look like a hospital kitchen or something, all function. And so it's all about the different gifts that we all have. And that you're all 5 of these, by the way. It's just that right now, at this point in your life, this is how you're prioritizing things. The circle person is the person who wants to embrace all wholeness. You're trying to see your life more holistically. You don't want to compartmentalize your life anymore. And I think this happens frequently in midlife. I used to walk into a room, I've been telling groups lately until I was 40, I'd walk into a room and say, oh, I wonder if these people are going to like me. And then at some point in my 40s, I woke up and I realized I was saying, I wonder if I'm going to like these people. And I like it a whole lot better on this side. And that's a circle thing to do. It's the circle is the symbol of the person who's defining their true self in search of the self-actualization. You're on a journey of discovery, and you want to embrace it all, and everyone is welcome. If you're an employer, you're hiring a circle, they're the people you want up front dealing with the public because they're going to be, gracious and good salespeople and really spin things well and positively. If you ask a circle out to dinner next week, they may say, oh, sure, I want to bring my best friend Betty, and I'm going to ask so-and-so, and I have a visitor from out of town, and because they want everybody involved. Think of it as big arms embracing the world. Or the circle may say, I don't know, call me next Friday. I'll see if I still feel like it then. It's kind of, that would be another circle thing. The negative energy of the circle is it's all about me because you're on this journey defining yourself and nothing else matters but your own self-promotion and all that stuff. That would be the negative. And the fear of a circle is that you'll never find your real self, that you'll never live in. Another example that I've been using, I have a very dear friend who's just got her degree in Chinese medicine. She lives in Chinatown down in New York. And when she first told me she was going to be pursuing this, she, by the way, used to work for the Archdiocese of New York, so that sent her right into the healing ministry. And so anyhow, I asked her, I said, what's better? What's the Chinese medicine or Western medicine? And she said, our professor said the very first day of class, that was the very first thing he said. And she said his reply when he's asked that is, they're both good. He said, if you have cancer or heart trouble, you want Western medicine. If you want to prevent cancer and heart trouble, you want Eastern medicine. So they're equally good. It's just depending on your need and what stage of life you are. So and that's what a circle sees life as both and, that it's all good. Whereas a square sees things as either or. You want the black and white surety, that one, negates the other. Whereas a circle, it's like let's work, teamwork, that kind of thing. Okay? The triangle is the symbol of the person who I've come to find often people who are on the verge of retiring are drawn to triangles in that upper 3 range there because it's for when you're on the verge of something new. The triangle fits the person who is dreaming new dreams in their life, trying to create something new, have a new vision. If you're hiring this person, a triangle would be the development office or the mission office of an institution, the people that are going to be out there. Oh, let's try this. We've never done this before. This is it. We'll start this campaign. They may not be able to do it themselves. They're not necessarily doers. They're thinkers, and just new possibilities. Now, the triangle was considered the most perfect shape by the ancient Greeks. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. 3s, we love 3s. Every world religion has 3 as a sacred number. We say, Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord. We do things in 3s, not by accident, because it's sacred. It's the Trinity. And so that's why it's associated with the world of new dreams and visions and possibilities. It's a spiritual thing. Artists will tell you the shoulder is the base of a triangle. The top is where, in Eastern Hindu tradition, this is where spirituality is. The color is lavender, and that's the color of spiritual age and wisdom. That poem, when I'm an old lady, I'm going to start wearing purple. That's all related to this whole sense of new visions for yourself. And purple, the liturgical color, is related to that as well. That's why we have it in Advent and Lent, the coming of something special. Okay? Now, did everybody draw an upright triangle? Anybody draw an upside down triangle? Oh, thank God. A couple times I've had people say, I drew a right triangle, and I don't know what the hell that means, but actually an upright triangle is a symbol of male power. An upside down one is feminine or female power in energy. One thrusts outward into space, kind of phallically. The other draws us internally to ourselves, all right? So what's the most perfect sign and symbol in Judaism? The Jewish star. It's when you put 2 triangles, opposite triangles together. And so instead of opposites working against each other, they're united as one. And what it symbolizes is male and female, God created us. That God's not this male being, that God's bigger than all that, And so when you put two triangles together, you have 12 points. And that became the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12, apostles, finality. I mentioned that earlier. So, and we love trying. My mother used to say, if two famous people died, somebody else is going to die. People die in threes. There's that whole. So the negative aspect of the triangle is just being lofty all the time, not being down to earth. You all know people that you say their head's in the clouds, or they're out in la la land. It's because they're dreaming new things up. When I'm in the sketching stage of a painting, I think it's the triangle mode. It's that future directed, and that's the fear of the triangles, not having any new dreams or visions in life, that you're going to be stuck. The only difference between a rut and the grave is 6 feet. So. And what's next? The spiral. The spiral is the most recurring shape in nature. We start out as little spirals in our mother's wombs. Now that we see all these pictures from the Hubble telescope, how many galaxies are spirals. You go to the beach, go to the Cape, and waves are coming in spiral motion. Shells wash up on the beach. Shells are spirals, especially conch shells. That's why St. John the Baptist is always shown holding a shell as a symbol of baptism. Why at your churches they have little brass shells to dip the water. It's all about the origins of life and the beginning. So in church liturgical circles, it would be the labyrinth. Symbolizes your life journey. And if you started your spiral when you drew it on the inside, it could mean something different than if you started on the outside and went in. Do you remember how you did it? Because if you started on the inside and went out, it could indicate that you're more comfortable as an introvert, that you like to do your work internally first. You draw your energy that way, If you started on the outside, you're an extrovert, and you draw your energy from being with others, perhaps, Now, most people, the healthy person, if you do Myers-Briggs, is right on the bridge there, that when one thing's appropriate. It's the difference between action and contemplation, basically,
I noticed that at our table, some of us have the going clockwise spiral, and others have the other way.
I thought you all looked a little weird over there. If you went counterclockwise, that could mean that you're looking to your past for answers. You're staying stuck in the past, not moving forward, not moving in the direction of a clock. The negative energy of the spiral is having no squareness whatsoever, no boundaries, no borders, just eternally searching, never able to drop anchor anywhere. And the labyrinth is that. It symbolized the life journey, starting in the center and working your way out, through life. And the fear of a spiral is getting stuck, not having any new creative. It's a symbol of the creative person as well. What goes around comes around. That kind of, you're comfortable with that notion. A notion squares would never like. And lastly, the cross. The cross is for those of you who are tired of dualism in life. As Richard Rohr calls it, falling upward, the second half of life spirituality, where you've spent the first half building your life and paying attention to the rules and starting a family and a career and all that, but then at some point you realize, all right, that's all done, there's got to be more than this, and you're looking beneath the surface. And so you're discovering what used to be duality in life, opposites fighting each other, like St. Paul, my spirit and my flesh, and I'm doing the things I shouldn't be doing, and I shouldn't be doing what I am doing. Remember when he wrote all that? At some point in life, you realize it's all good. God's in all of it. And so the cross is a symbol of you're trying to balance your spiritual self and your physical relational self. The horizontal line is your physical life here on earth. Think of it as the horizon. And the spiritual vertical line is your yearning for God. It's going into your depths. This is right out of Celtic spirituality, by the way. They felt that we have three energies at all time. What's beneath your feet is your past, the ancestors, how you got here today, your roots. Where you are on earth is like the trunk of a tree. It's where you are in your present reality. And the reaching out to the heavens is your future. You know, the boughs and the branches stretching to the sky. So it's past, present, and future. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again, all wrapped up in one. So that's what the vertical line is. And too often that feels like it's in competition with the horizontal line. So if you want to strike a balance in the cross mode and say it's all good. Now, how we often seek this balance in life is through relationship. That's where the relationship piece comes in. We expect sometimes others, well, it can work either way. You know, sometimes people who are totally opposite to us balance us out. You know, they fill the needs that we don't have within. And sometimes that can work against you too, you know. But it's all about not putting undue expectations on your partners or spouses or best friends, whoever, expecting them to fulfill you totally and meet all your needs and all that stuff. If that you can only do for yourself. I saw that on Oprah once, so I know it's true. That any relationship's headed for disaster if you're coming at it that way, you know, expecting that. So that's the relationship piece. And the fear would be that you never find that balance, you never find the right relationship to help you work things out with yourself, you know. Boy, that's coming in right on time. We only have 2 minutes left. Anybody have any questions about anything? Before we end this, though, I want to tell you that the 3 most important shapes are 1, 3, and 5. I'm offering this, by the way, as a way of prayer and doodling. If you want to have your cup of coffee tomorrow morning, get a piece and just doodle these shapes and doodle those 3 together. And the most important of those 3, 1 is important because that's where you like to think you are in life. You're working on that. That's your goal. 5 is important because the things we reject and don't like can tell us as much about ourselves as the things we do embrace, right? And where they meet in the middle is 3. So the most important of all 5 is 3, your spiritual desire, because that is the one telling you that your instinct, your spirit is saying, this is where I need healing right now. That this is an emptiness in my life that I would like Christ to fill, you know, and lead me to it. And I leave you with the thought from St. Augustine, who said, by the time we have the awareness to pray for things in life, we already have them. We just don't know it yet. Our outside selves are always catching up with what our instincts already know. So that's what 3 is for you. You already have it. Don't panic. It's coming. So, and you have a question back there.
Sorry, what was the fear of the square?
The fear of the square. Oh, yeah, no, you didn't miss it. I don't think I said. Oh my God, this wasn't on the agenda. It's the fear of the unexpected things that happen in life, you know, that you can't plan or have an answer for. Any other questions? There's folks with microphones there.
The author.
Angeles Arrien, Arrien. It's called Signs of Life. So I want to flip ahead, and if you can all get your cameras out and take a look at all these neat things I didn't get to tell you. Here's the book that's coming out shortly. If you take a picture of this with your phone, you can connect to my website. This is all this stuff. Here it is. This is but anyhow, it's my Facebook and website address. There. So if you go to Bro Mickey McGrath, you can get my daily posts for Lent, and on my website. And I'm. Yes. What do you paint with? Acrylic paint. When I paint, a lot of what you saw lately was iPad. I'm doing a lot of work on my iPad these days, though, too. And I have a drawing app on there. I use a stylus and draw right on the. What else? I don't know. Yeah, keep an eye for the book. That's the next one. And next year, we will have out Dear Young People about Pope, what's his name, Francis. You're wearing me out. I'm starting to lose my... I'm happy to sign any books that... I understand we ran out of books there, and but we can order them and have them sent to you today. It's called Pontifex. Are you on Twitter? I'm not a Twitter guy, so I don't know how. Yeah, but Pontifex is the name of his address. So if you go to Twitter and put that, I think you can. Pontifex, Pontifex. And have a 12-year-old explain how to do Twitter, because I can't. I took a Twitter class 2 years ago, and halfway through I thought, I don't get this at all. I don't. You're welcome. Thank you all for coming today. It's delightful.